Welcome, everybody, again to our next episode of Fuel Futures with President of Canadians Affordable Energy, Dan McTeague. MP for 18 years with the Liberal government in the past and now an expert on gas analysis. And thanks so much again for being with us, Dan.
Great to be here, Michael. Looking forward to our discussion today and many more to come in the future.
We're going to cover a few things. Biggest I'd like to discuss is the insanity of a net zero in Canada and electric vehicles and so forth. But can you just lead us up to what's been happening lately? You're getting a lot of discussion about. People are asking you in your field. Share that with us as we start this session.
Well, there's been a lot of questions as to what the Mayor Carney government really intends to do. And now we know that it's going to kick the can down the road another 3, 4, 5 months until October before we get any idea of what it plans to do. The plan isn't even a plan. It's more of a discussion, a lot of nice words, a lot of buzzwords. And I think for a lot of people concerned about the decline in our economic outlook, jobs down, inflation still up, particularly the cost of living issues still very much at the center, while a clear indication of investment leaving Canada and uncertainty about the investments that we've made, especially in things like EVs in Ontario and Quebec, as well as the prospect of not just U.S. tariffs, but the Chinese tariffs, which are really hammering Western Canadian farmers and other farmers across the country in other areas. So in the midst of all this uncertainty, we don't have much in the way of any movement by the government. We're in a very serious financial situation. We know that Mark Carney's been called it a crisis. And yet here we are taking the summer off and as if nothing's happening. I happen to have been on Parliament Hill in 1982 and 81 when spending so much time on the Constitution, then Prime Minister Trudeau made Parliament sit through much of summer. And we've had other summer sittings in the past. One would think that given the situation at hand, not just with the weakness in the Federation, but the economic outlook being as weak as it is, the government's having a spending problem. It doesn't seem to be able to get its priorities right, that the House should in fact be sitting as early as possible, since for all intents and purposes, it hasn't functioned in almost a year. And so I think there's concern people are raising that maybe we have a government, a parliament that is run by executive decree, getting money by extraordinary measures through the Governor General. That's not a way to run a country. And if you have a plan and you have this idea that you want to implement, it's good to say you need some time, but in the meantime, we have to address some of the fundamental crises that we have before us right now, not just in terms of tensions, but also in terms of economic necessity. Otherwise, it's really just a kabuki theater. We're trying to figure out what this man is all about, and the elbows up crowd doesn't seem to mind. And yet, indications are that the country is going towards some fiscal problems, which could raise the attention of bond rating agencies. We see that the next 2 quarters are going to see another $100,000 net loss, 100,000 job net loss in Canada. And we have an ever burgeoning public service in which the demands are out. I don't even talk about Canada Post and other factors that seem to be, belaboring the point that we don't have a government that has really unveiled or demonstrated its willingness to tackle head on the problems that have been festering for over 10 years. One has to believe the composition of the caucus and the cabinet being very much of the previous government that we're headed for more of the same.
Unbelievable how over the fall and in the winter, everything was prorogued. And then now, biggest issue Canada's faced in who knows how long with states and tariffs. And then there's still, like you said, everything's off for the summer. My, what a situation the country is in and the impact that this deals with energy. Can you elaborate a little bit on that again?
Well, with energy, we are looking at an uncertain future. We talk about government that says, they plan big in terms of approval of major projects as long as they receive national consensus. Well, what the heck does that mean? The national consensus doesn't mean the majority of Canadians plus one or 50% plus one. It means all sorts of other, fringe groups and so-called self-promoting stakeholders saying yes or no. And we can't have a situation where Quebec says there isn't a social acceptance in our province, therefore you can't build a pipeline, because that's red meat in front of Alberta, basically telling them, forget it. It will take your $13 billion that you give in equalization payments, because you pay a lot to the federal government, not just directly in taxes, but also in terms of revenues. But we're going to stifle and we're going to frustrate your ability to get projects approved. We have a lot of interest on LNG, and yet, we've had 18 projects that have really gone south, literally, as Canadians refuse to build LNG facilities and pipelines, even though the investments there would have cost Canadians anything. Americans have gladly taken our unwillingness to build what the world needs to, as it were, address the climate problem, which is a global problem, not a national one, even though a lot of our policies are focused on what we do here nationally. And that has certainly meant billions of dollars in potential investments and economic opportunity that Canada has walked away from because it was woke, because it was too preoccupied with ESG, that's environmental, social, and governance, and followed a mantra that basically said, well, we can borrow money, money grows on trees, or we can not worry about the debt and deficit. We won't produce anything. We won't attract any money to Canada. And now we find ourselves in a real mess because we have misunderstood and mischaracterized how important energy is to the Canadian economy, representing 10 to 15% of its entire GDP, but recognizing that it's much greater than that because it is ubiquitous. It's in everything that we use. You have in any given house, you have 6,000 products or more that are derived from energy, and oil. We have a lot of it, and natural gas. And so the effect is to create instability in the Federation, while at the same time clinging to an international agenda, which is based on flimsy science, which in my view penalizes a country that's 1.5% of the total carbon emissions, as if carbon's a bad thing. Without it, we wouldn't live. If people don't like carbon dioxide, CO2, I suggest they stop exhaling, but I digress, Michael. I think the point is that we have really bent this issue of climate beyond recognition. It's really hurt the country. It's damaged it badly. We've added that with people who believe that migration can be done willy-nilly. You can bring as many people in as you want, and there will be no disruption. Young people can't find work this summer. There are real fundamental problems in Canada. Many of them cannot be blamed on global factors. They are self-inflicted wounds. And I'm not sure that we're going to be able to resolve that this summer, as energy prices continue to rise regardless of what we do in Canada. And Canada, being an energy supplier, is denying the world and itself the opportunity to take advantage and get ahead of this inflationary curve.
Let's segue back into that, the carbon emission. Let's talk about net zero again. And you had talked with me in the past and how saying it really is for Canada to go toward the net zero, and still waiting, I guess, on Carney if he's going to make that announcement. But maybe talk a bit right now about China was ahead with electric vehicle technology and the pollution that it's causing when this is all supposed to be green. You just lay that right out for everybody watching this today.
Well, net zero is a lot of things, not just about carbon taxes. It's also caps on emissions from our oil and gas sector, caps on emissions on our manufacturing sector. It is the imposing of EV mandates, so we all drive electric vehicles by 2035. It's also about spending billions of dollars to incentivize people to buy, incentivize companies to make, and incentivize infrastructure to be built at substantial public dollars. It's all part of the electrification fantasy that by 2050, 90% of all of our energy comes from electricity. It's not going to happen. It's a violation of physics and the law of thermodynamics, and people have to understand full well these are nice little plans, but they have no business in being imposed on Canadians. And so, of the many aspects of EV, of net zero, and I mentioned just two of them: EV mandates, EV building, and of course, carbon taxes. Not just one, not just two, but actually three carbon taxes. The consumer carbon tax, which is temporarily suspended. The second one, which is the clean fuel standard. No one talks about it. You and I are paying 5-6 cents a liter already. That's where refiners have to go to the carbon credit market, pay people with fallow fields that are doing absolutely nothing, say, that's a carbon credit because you're not doing anything. It's not generating. It's a field that's probably carbon neutral. Therefore, we're going to pay you $500 a credit. We have to pass that on to consumers. So we're paying for that. There's also, of course, the output-based pricing system, which OBPS, which provinces and the federal government is going to be looking at to restore its carbon taxes, and that's coming inevitably. Building code changes, the suppression of your ability to buy propane or natural gas stoves or heating facilities, and move towards heat pumps. I won't even get into who owns Train and other projects like that, but it is a lot of fantasy that has now been backed up by hard public dollars, much of it borrowed, to be able to sustain an agenda which isn't very well understood. I don't get it. You want to create net zero on carbon, a CO2, a product that is inert, that is important for photosynthesis, for our, for biodiversity on the planet. You need more carbon, not less. And so, scientific nonsense. By the way, scientists who are paid by the government to come up with these conclusions to say it's a bad thing. And now we're seeing, after 10 years, the net zero thing is walking away. Now, specifically to the question of EVs, in the early 2000s, China was trying to figure out a way to supply itself with vehicles as it was moving away from bicycles and trains and coal-driven steam trains to modernizing its society and making that great, they call it a leap. And they did it many times before, but to do that, they figured that there was no future in internal combustion engines because they couldn't beat North America, they couldn't beat Europe in terms of efficiency, the manner in which you build these things with international mandates, the fact that they were very cost competitive and extraordinarily reliable. So China decided to gamble on electric vehicles back in 2005, 2010, and began to build these things more effectively, more efficiently, more cost efficiently, even though, of course, they're all built with fossil fuels and coal and hydrocarbons. That's the energy needed to extract the minerals, extract the products, to build the polymers, the resins, the tires, the glass, etc., all coming from oil. I digress. China has an advantage, a 10, 15-year advantage on us here in Canada and the United States when it comes to electric vehicles. They can build them cheaper and just as efficiently as anyone else can. And so we've decided we're going to put tariffs on them. And what does that mean? Yeah, you're not going to let Chinese EVs come and compete against the subsidized jalopies we're trying to create here. But you now have a counter tariff from China, which is, I suspect, far more harmful. So farmers in Western Canada, farmers on the East Coast are paying for a tariff and not getting their product to market, so that Ontario can continue to subsidize EVs that most smart auto manufacturers have decided they're going to walk away from, if not go bankrupt. So it's a conundrum. It's an obvious problem. Net zero is a failure, and it has hurt Canadians and it's hurt Canada. And anyone who plays with this game of saying, I'm going to stick with it, with everything that it means, carbon sequestration, all this other nonsense. It is not pollution. Let's understand something. CO2 is not pollution. If it were the case, stop exhaling. And I really mean that to people who want to be trendy and cute. But the issue now has become, we have done untold economic damage and potentially sovereign damage to our country as a result of pursuing net zero, and now allowing not just the United States to take advantage of our economic weakness, but also China to slap us back with something that is far more harmful than us trying to build EVs that no one wants. Over-glorified golf carts are great in cities, but they have no business in a modern, cold economy like Canada, where we need to get from one place to another. We have to travel several 100,000 miles to get there.
It's amazing how, like you said, it's more of a fad than anything, and so many people have bought into it. But Canada, like you said, it's just cold. I remember you saying at one point a few months ago, imagine tractors and this kind of equipment running on it. It's unbelievable how people have fallen for this, and it needs to be exposed. I mean,
we're going to put the battery charger in the middle of a 200,000 acre farm where you're in the middle of Weyburn, Saskatchewan. I mean, there's no bloody way these things are going to work. And by the way, we don't have the $2 trillion it's going to take to create that infrastructure from coast to coast, that electrification. Royal Bank came out and said 2 years ago, this is Fantasyland 101. And anybody who believes we can do these things, is really high on something, or obviously gets a lot of federal money, grift, so that they can go around and promote this stuff. Look, take away the federal government's incentives, take away public money that's being used to push these things, and you'll get scientists, engineers, an automotive sector, and Canadians getting back to reality, saying this stuff just doesn't work. We've had 10 years of this nonsense. We're not moving the dial, and we shouldn't be pushing renewables where they cost people a lot more money, in my province, a hell of a lot more money, than things that we do know works. And don't talk to me about hydro dams. You're in Manitoba. I know Quebec's right beside me. Yeah, hydro dams are extraordinarily damaging. You have to flood a lot of land, create all sorts of environmental concerns, and not to mention, tensions with Indigenous communities to build these things. So, I'm not sure what the easy answers are. I know that natural gas and oil, we have plenty of it. 87 trillion cubic feet of natural gas reserves in Canada. In other words, if no other country had natural gas, Canada could keep the rest of the world on natural gas for the next 50, 60 years. So I think we need to, get back and reset our priorities. The Great Reset should be smarten the hell up and start smelling the roses and of course, drinking back the good coffee.
You were very integral in the Prius, the Toyota Prius coming along, and hybrid rather than just full EV. And I think you shared with me that people were questioning you, didn't pay attention, and now lots of money's kind of going toward that. I think that would be fascinating for folks to hear that side of it, and how you've got experience in what's a lot more wise than just going full EV.
Oh, that's a career move in my life. I had two choices: either get into politics in 1992 or continue with a little tiny company that was number 5 in Canada, Toyota. And I chose the political side, but I never lost track of what we had done when I was media relations with Toyota, which is now number 1 in the world, number 1 in Canada, and the number 1 exporter of vehicles from Canada to the United States. And it was very clear to me back in the early 1990s when speaking to the technology folks at Toyota in Japan that they said the future is going to be hybrid. EVs really weren't talked about all that much because they had lost fashion 75 years before in the 1920s when the world abandoned them, as they were useless, irrelevant, and very difficult, if not inefficient, very difficult to charge and leave them out for a couple of days to replace these old batteries. And nevertheless, Toyota's view was that, yeah, we could do a little bit of that, but the future was a combination of hybrids, and if necessary, even hydrogen, although hydrogen is extremely expensive, very power intensive to create. So something like that wouldn't be cost effective. Company that always had small, efficient cars that could do very, very well, and was very attractive to most young Canadians and around the world back as early as the late 1960s, early 1970s. But, in my last few times at the company, we had launched a little thing called the Tsunami. And the Tsunami was a two-seater prototype that was actually the forerunner to the Prius, which was fully launched in 1994. By then, I was already elected member of parliament, but I remember my old company putting that out, and it was very popular. But the company kept saying the future is hybrid. And that is a combination of a battery, which is recharged every time you step on the brake. And at a certain level, up to 80, 90 kilometers an hour, can actually reduce the amount of fuel that you're using. Mated with other technologies, it's made vehicles much more efficient, running on smaller platforms, more fuel efficient, more environmentally friendly. And that's, I think, the way in which technology and progress goes, not coming around trying to be trendy and cute like some of the people, the Canadian Auto Parts Manufacturing Association, Flavio Volpe and those other guys, trying to say, well, we can build an EV and we can get more federal government money to do this or that. I mean, that's nice, but that's not practical. And that's not the way the automotive industry works. It's very dynamic. And we now realize that having placed all our eggs in one basket, thinking Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, what a terrible name, was somehow going to last beyond Biden, became very clear that when Trump came into power, it wasn't his tariffs that should have been a take note moment for Canadians. It should have been the fact that, hey, we're getting rid of the EV mandates. We're not going to impose on Americans, a lack of choice in terms of the vehicles that they buy. And so With that, Canada, 90% of its exports going to the United States meant effectively all our ideas and all our gimmicks and all our feelings and warm, fuzzy, trendy thoughts on EVs went out the window. And with that, bankruptcies, smart companies saying we're not going to go that way. I'm just surprised it took Honda so long. Despite the grift, despite the incentives, they're not prepared to go that route. Toyota was never prepared to go that route. Companies that have done it, well, no offense, but these are same companies who've gone bankrupt several times. Stellantis and, of course, GM, famous because I was a member of Parliament, Pickering, Ajax, Whitby, right next to the old Oshawa plant. How many times have they gone bankrupt and sought a bailout? Chrysler, I didn't even want to talk about Stellantis Chrysler. It's more often than not. Yes, they have paid their bills. Sometimes they haven't. But I think we have to, de-escalate the trendiness and start dealing with reality, because reality has bitten very hard into these companies that many of them have now said, no, we're not building EVs. Ford, where I am here in Oakville, just down the street where my father-in-law worked for many years, said, no, we're not building EVs. We're going to be building F-250s. That's what the market wants. That's what the market needs. This is North America, and give everybody a sort of slap on the side of the head. Stellantis, no, we're not building Dodge Chargers. Look, I'm old enough to know a 318 and a 340 and a 383, and the big Hemi engines that Dodge was known for, Chrysler. People who buy those vehicles do not want to buy, toasters. They don't want to buy over-glorified computers, over-glorified golf carts, as I called them earlier. They want a charger with some heft in it, and that's kind of why Stellantis is not building an EV charger in Brampton. That plant stays shuttered. The one in Windsor doesn't look like it's going very far. Same for Volkswagen. Same for Honda. So all of these companies are now realizing the gig is up, and we need to now have a serious adult, put your boys' pants on, if you will, discussion about net zero, because it is a fantasy, it is a fallacy, and is a dangerous one that we continue to pursue. I mean, why should we be giving municipalities $2 billion to go around talking about how to make your house green and shut down natural gas plants, which we desperately need in cold winters? Or in your province, it's warm. My province is freezing here. This is one of the coldest Mays I've seen in 30 to 40 years. So climate is back. It's acting like it does, but we need these things efficiently, and we need to have a real serious discussion about how off the beaten track we've directed ourselves. We need to get back into where we can do very good, and we can sell the things that the world really wants and keep our economy humming and turn things around for the next generation.
I think people would like to know also, just getting back into this a little bit again, China, how much pollution is actually going forth, coal factories, all of that insanity. If people knew the efforts trying to be green, and that's what's taking place. Describe that, what's going on.
Well, China has increased its coal plants by about a third. There's more coal plants built in the past 2 years than all the coal plants that exist in the world. So China is now fully in charge. If you add India to it, it says they plan to build out coal plants till 2050. Yeah, there's nuclear in that too, and it's really important people understand that. But is this where we're going? China is going to build out its AI. This is going to take over everything and use an extreme amount of water, an extreme amount of energy, and it's not going to happen, if we build more solar panels and windmills. I'm sorry, but those things don't do a whole lot to increase what is, one Amazon plant AI in my community here in Oakville or Milton, Ontario. One plant would use as much energy as all the consumers and residences in this community of 200,000 people. So you have to understand where we're heading, and the energy demand will require that Canada provide the kind of basic understanding of its, of its prowess. We should be investing in things like small nuclear reactors, which are more than just prototypes. It's the same kind of technology that was used on submarines for many years, nuclear submarines. So we're there, and that's the kind of investments we need to make. Who can provide the heft? Who can provide the energy load, what we call the base load, that can address the concerns of a modern society? And we're not going to do that by simply doubling down on windmills that don't work when it's not windy, or solar panels that don't work when they're snow covered, or it's the dark of night in the middle of winter.
Where are we kind of changing the topic a little, in Manitoba, Western Canada, gas numbers, prices, and so forth. What weekends coming up? What
Yeah,
people can expect? Trying to enjoy some of this warm weather. I wish you were as warm as we are. We are pretty warm right now.
I know, I know. Well, we need a little bit of that down here. Maybe get the fan and blow some of those windmills, turn them the other way, and get them to blow the warmer weather, colder. It's 13 degrees here in the GTA Toronto area, and it's been like this 7 degrees, 6 degrees at night for quite some time. So I've even got my plants that I want to get into the garden, but they'll be damaged if I leave them out. Gas prices are going to remain where they are. Up and down a penny here too in the 130 range for most of Manitoba. And I think that's pretty much more the case for most of North America, with the exception of Vancouver, which is going to see some pretty significant decreases, as I predicted on our site here at affordableenergy.ca, as well as gaswizard.ca, which of course I'm going to merge into two, because doing two of these things at the same time tends to take a lot of time. I am not seeing prices drop, but I'm not seeing them increasing radically, at least until we get to July and we see what happens in the U.S. Gulf Coast. We see where demand goes, and I think demand has been very strong. In many cases, the U.S. Memorial long day vacation took place last weekend, and we saw pretty big increases in demand in the United States, and that is a function of lower prices and a stronger economy. That is likely to add support to the price of energy. And regardless, at this time of year, Michael, it's really important for people to understand you got to look at the gasoline futures, not oil futures, when you want to know where gasoline prices are going. A lot of people say, well, oil dropped. And many times oil dropped, but gasoline, which is the actual product we use, derived from oil, will actually go up in price. So, or conversely, will go in a different direction. And that's because in the summer, your demand is up 15, 20% from what's used during the winter. And so that particular commodity takes precedence over its feedstock oil. And that's why I think the 130 range we're paying here in the province will probably stay in there. We could see a scenario where it drops a few pennies, just as much as we could see a scenario it goes up a couple of pennies. May have to do with refineries shutting down, the weakness or value of the Canadian dollar. And by the way, we've talked about this before, you and I. The biggest tax on gasoline is the weakness in the Canadian dollar versus the U.S. greenback. And despite the U.S. getting a credit downgrade, it still takes 138, 139 pennies to buy a U.S. dollar. What does that mean for gasoline? What does it mean for every other commodity as a result? There is some equivalency. Well, it's 24 cents a liter because we price all of our commodities in U.S. terms. When I look at the value of what comes out of the Chicago spot market. So yesterday, for instance, it was $2.18 a gallon, which would normally give me, somewhere in the vicinity of about 65, 70 cents. But because of the weak Canadian dollar, it's more like 80, 85 cents. So that's where you see this additional price being added, because we have a dollar that isn't responding to the realities that, we're an energy producing country. If we sold more energy, we sold more oil, we sold more gas, sold more widgets, we would see the Canadian dollar strengthen and our purchase power would increase as a result.
Yeah, that's a good point. The dollar is an issue. Watching the news, and we always give the stats of where the dollar is, and staying down there. It's not coming up. And that
No.
people need to realize. Well, as we leave, anything that's really weighing on your mind now you want people to pay attention to? Maybe you can help give them some advice of where to look and what to watch for.
Yeah, I mean, there is always in larger cities, when it comes to things like gasoline, always buy in the evening, never buy in the morning. That's a small tip that I give to people, but it does tend to pay off, especially in cities like Winnipeg. You might even find that in Brandon and even in Dauphin and other places. But I would also say what we ought to be looking for is more signals from the Canadian government as to how it plans to roll out this national infrastructure program of corridor. What does that really mean? Manitoba may play very well into this because we have had many discussions in the past about the potential for a port, in near Churchill, which would be used as a way of getting our oil to global markets. Everyone wants to talk about natural gas, and I think that's important, but you can't have natural gas without oil. In fact, many of our oil sites produce natural gas. They're not just, natural gas in themselves. So I think we need to have a little more discussion about if we are talking about an energy corridor, it has to include, it can't just be electricity. It also has to include oil. It also has to include gas. Why? Because those are the biggest revenue generators for the country, and they maintain and they uphold and they advance our standard of living. So let's not be sidelined and sidetracked by electricity. Electricity is important, but if we build a corridor and say we can intertie with other provinces, we may well wind up with blackouts. I want to deal with all forms of energy that we have. We do extraordinarily well. Every region has its own peculiarities, but we can't talk about one without talking about the other. And you can't sort of just say, well, yes to gas, no to oil, yes to electricity, no to pipelines because we don't like them. And I think it's very clear. One region of the country cannot block the wider national interest. And so when I think of consensus, you're not going to get it. But someone's going to have to, wear their strong arm here and say, look, we speak for the national government, and we are going to put these things through. And there will be opposition, but that opposition is the good of the many comes well before the interests of the few. And we've heard from too many who are taking the position that they can block things by virtue of pretending that they have some kind of a veto, and they don't. No one has a veto on what is the wider interest of the country. And I think it's very clear for Canadians how that's defined. It's prosperity. If it's good for the country financially, economically, ultimately it's good for the country socially and for other factors as well.
Wow. Always a wealth of information. This is just always so good. I thoroughly enjoy this. And you're president of Canadians for Affordable Energy. How can people find out more about you, what you're providing out there on the internet, and just help people?
Yeah, I mean, look, come to the site, affordableenergy.ca. You'll see I write on a number of topics. I do a lot of interviews. It's also a site that'll give you the gas price prediction in many of the major cities across Canada. So it tries to help people do a little bit of strive to try to give people a bit of value for coming there and just watching and seeing what we have, but also, contribute to your, insights as to how we can make this a better country, notwithstanding the political games and gamesmanship. And despite the setbacks of a few weeks ago of rewarding a government, as we Canadians apparently did, maybe time to see if we can contribute to cobbling together a rapid response to some of the policies that Ottawa may be pushing as to whether or not they are in the best interests of the nation or not. I'm hoping for the first, but I'm prepared to deal with the latter. And the other way, of course, is gas. Price Wizard is my Twitter account. That's also a way in which to engage. I do a lot there. It's a lot of fun, by the way, and it's I deal with a lot of bots and folks that are trolls. That's fine. I know how to deal with them, but that's an opportunity to share a lot of information that we don't currently get from a lot of mainstream media that tends to have its own agenda and often marches to a very different drummer that tends to be less and less relevant, I think, in the lives of most Canadians.
Well, once again, thank you so much. Hope people learn from this, and it's to keep up, and we'll be in touch with you and have some more talks and discussions and what people need to know. The insights that you have in the background is just so precious. Thanks so much, Dan.
Always a pleasure, Michael. Looking forward to more of this.